Greetings, comic lovers, and welcome back to another interview. Today we're talking to the artist of Bittersweet Vows. Bittersweet Vows is a Depression-era story that blends the trends of the time with something supernatural. When a young married couple goes to find their fortune to start a new life, well, they get more than they bargained for. Not just in the form of gangsters, but in the form of vampires. You know I can't resist a vampire story, so I was intrigued. The story was written by Alex Schirkenbach with art by Gustavo Novaes. We are fortunate enough to be able to talk to him today. We cover a whole range of topics. We talk about comics in Brazil, we talk about liaising between writer and artist, we talk about finding one's own style while respecting the source material, and more. It's a very fascinating conversation. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, then stay tuned. I'm Sasha, and that's enough of a preamble. Short and sweet. Let's get started. I hope you enjoy. Greetings, comic lovers, and welcome back. And today, as you can see, once more, we are in the realm of interviews. We're here today with the artist Gustavo Novaes, who just told me how to pronounce his name, and I did it right, so I'm very proud of myself.
Hi, Sasha.
So I first encountered your work when Alex Schirkenbach sent me Bittersweet Vows, which I have right here in front of me in the nice trade. And so I got to sample some of, yes, we're matching. I got to sample some of your work. So how exactly did you get into drawing comics?
Oh my God. As a kid here, hi, my name is Gustavo. I'm here in Brazil. As a kid here in Brazil, I think superhero comics, when I was growing up back in the 90s, superhero comics was not very popular in my generation. I mean, superhero animations were really popular. Movies, I grew up watching Batman movies, like those Tim Burton movies. I loved it. I think the superhero comics were more popular with a bit of an older generation when I was growing up. So first I got into manga and then I got into comics. It's usually the opposite in the West, but I'm a bit weird in that way. I got really into manga when I was in elementary school. And then around the time I was 15, I started reading much more of DC and Marvel stuff. And that's when I realized that some people from Brazil actually work for DC and Marvel, and they actually produce comic books that are like, oh, okay, that's an option. That's cool. But I always loved doing it. And I've been creating independent comics here in Brazil for a few years now. I released a graphic novel called A Cabana with Caroline Fabre and Caro Metropolis that was released back in 2019 in Comic Con Experience here in Sao Paulo. I was wanting to do something else, something different. It was around the time, it was 2020 when everything just stopped because, well, the world ended. I was doing this short comic book story, a silent comic book story about a girl running away from a couple of Nazi officers from a concentration camp, basic stuff. I was going to publish it, to print it and sell it on Comic Con Experience that year. So, but then since there was no convention because of COVID, so I just put everything on my portfolio. And somehow, Alex, the guy who wrote Bittersweet Vows, saw those pages and like, hey, I might have a job for you. so I'm like, all right, okay. Actually, I thought it was a scam at first. I gotta say this because it was a while. I didn't check my Behance notification, my Behance messages for a while. One day I get there, I see those messages, and I'm like, who's this guy? Like, and then I Google him, and I'm like, how did he find me? Okay, there's something wrong with it. Thankfully, there wasn't. So we've been working together for about a year and a half now.
When it comes to doing the freelance art and putting yourself out there, how did you get started in that regard to creating your own art and then being like, okay, I'm going to actually produce this as a comic that's going to go out there?
I've been drawing ever since I was a kid. I don't know when it started, honestly. My mom says it. I was just born doing it. I don't know. But I always liked to draw. I was really addicted to anime. I mean, when I was like 12, you were cool if you knew how to draw Goku. So I made sure to learn how to draw Goku. I may have forgotten now, but I might remember. So I just really love doing it. But there were no artists in the family, so I didn't really know how to make a living out of it. I'm like, how to do it? Like, I don't know. So I tried some different stuff. I tried doing some different courses. I didn't know if it was possible for me to actually make a living out of my art in a way. I really love comic books, but I didn't know. I mean, in Brazil, the comic book market's not very well established. I mean, they have a really huge independent scene, but it's really hard to make a living out of it. I wasn't really putting all my eggs on that basket, but I really wanted to work with something related to images, to illustration. So I went and started studying digital design. I actually got a design degree. During that time, I started working with a couple of small projects here and there, with some small agencies. I really wanted to work with character design because it was my passion. It's still my passion. One of the favorite things I like to do when a comic book is actually designing characters, and I had a lot of fun with it. I got together with a few friends, and we started a company called Zero Flame Studios. It was a game development company. We actually worked on the company lasted 2.5 years actually, up until early 2017. Because we thought, well, we want to create narratives, we want to create stories, we want to create experiences. But I mean, we're young, no one's going to give us a job, so let's make our own company, because that way we don't have to worry about people hiring us, right? So we just started this company. We worked really hard on it for 2.5 years. Unfortunately, we went bankrupt because of a lot of reasons. But we did release one game for Android and iOS called Spaceship Overdrive. It was a side-scroller spaceship shooting game. We actually got a couple of awards here in Brazil because of the game. So it was going well. I mean, the production side of things was really good, but financial, not so much. So that's why the company failed. After that, I started working on a company called Alavanca here in Brazil. It's a graphic facilitation company. I don't know. Do you know what graphic facilitation is?
Not really. Can you define it?
Yeah, most people don't. It's really, every time I say that, no matter where I go, people have to explain it. But basically, when you have a workshop, when you have someone speaking in front of a lot of people, a presentation or whatever, most of the time, that content is very convoluted and people don't really pay attention to it. Sometimes because the speaker is not very good, sometimes because the topic is very complicated, sometimes because it's just too much. What we would do is draw these big panels, like usually the team is composed of usually like 2-3 people. These big panels like 2 meters long, I think that's like 6 feet, I don't know, for the Americans watching. We would draw everything that was happening on stage and everything the person was saying. I mean, the main topics, like bullet points. That way you can have this huge panel. We will scan it and send it to the clients, both the original and the digital copy.
Okay.
So that way they have a visual representation of everything that was said, which is a more interactive way to relate yourself to content. Well, that lasted for 3.5 years for me. In the meantime, I was doing this. I was doing graphic presentation, and at the same time, I was also working on comic books. And then COVID hit, and then everything stops. And I'm like, well, all right, well, I guess we can't have live events because we can't see anyone. I'm stuck at home. So after that, I started to focus much more on comic books, because it's something that I can do in my house whenever I want, and I always loved it. The storytelling side of things is just the thing that drives me most when it comes to creating comic books. So as I said, I made this kind of story, and Alex found the rest is just
You mentioned that in Brazil, like when you were growing up, that like the superhero comics weren't quite as popular. So would you say that that's still the case, or like what is the kind of dominant genre you would say in comics in Brazil?
Well, that's the thing. The superhero comics were not as popular with my generation, because I was born in '92. So in the '90s, I was learning how to read the late years. So like I was not the target audience. But the older people like their teens or 20s, they would buy comic books. Actually, they would buy much more than they buy now. Superhero comics and such. I think what really hooked me, my first contact with superheroes, for example, was with the cartoons, like Batman the animated series. And that Spider-Man series from the early 90s. Nowadays, when I watch that, the animation is really, really
It's a bit rough.
It's a bit rough, but I'm really fond of it.
Yeah, same.
I'm not gonna rewatch it because I don't want to mess with those memories, those sweet memories.
I will rewatch it, but it's the kind of thing where I add a disclaimer if I'm watching with other people. It's like, listen, it was the 90s.
Yeah, God, rewatching those things. Just, oh my God, there was so much better in my memory. Okay. That was my first contact. I really, really, really love Bruce Timm's Batman.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know who Bruce Timm was at the time, but still, I really loved it. I remember reading a lot of Spider-Man comic books when I was younger. But that's the thing, I don't know how it is there in Canada or the US. But up until like 10 years ago, being nerdy and like comic books wasn't very cool. So it was regarded as kid stuff. I mean, people read it, people liked it, but they wouldn't really talk about it. Like, yeah, that's the thing I do. I put it in my closet and let's hope no one finds out. I'm not sure. And now it's pretty cool with the MCU movies and stuff.
It's like in Canada, as I was growing up, it slowly started to become more popular, but through like anime first. Anime was something you had to hide like really hard. Like nobody watched that except we all did. And so you had to hide that. And then slowly they started introducing that into schools. I'd say like the mid 2000s, all of a sudden we got like a rack of like manga, and it was like a big deal. Like, ooh, we have a manga rack in like the library. And then the superheroes never really kind of became mainstream until the movies. And then the movies came, and then all of a sudden everybody was always a comic book fan kind of thing. It was like, I always loved it.
Yeah, I think there was at least here, it feels like there was a little bit of a shift after the first Iron Man movie came out.
Mm-hmm.
Because up until then, everybody was trying to be so serious and grown up. Batman Begins, Blade, X-Men with Ladder and stuff like that. And then Iron Man shows up with red and yellow, and I'm like, what? and it was cool. I mean, probably not during Carrie movie. It was cool. People's opinions really changed after that.
They did. It's really funny, I find, because I remember when Iron Man was coming out, having to explain who Iron Man was. And they were like, so he's like a robot dude. I'm like, no, listen, let me like. But now it's really funny because there's kind of like this retroactive popularity that happened, especially with Iron Man, where it's like he was always popular. I'm like, except for that time when he wasn't, but that's okay.
those couple of decades when he wasn't. But,
yeah, you know, it's no big deal.
Oh my God, when Captain America, the first Avenger came out here in Brazil, it was weird because, I mean, people who didn't read comics, they were not used to the character. So the guy showing up with an American flag, people were looking at it like, explaining that was a bit hard, but the character grew on people. Now people love it. So it's fun. The same with anime, I think. We had a bit of the publishing. I think manga first started being published in Brazil in the early 2000s.
Okay.
With Sakura Card Captors and Rurouni Kenshin. They were really cheap printed versions, like small with this. Mm-hmm. Now they get a little bit bigger. You can see this huge figure thing here.
Yeah.
Somehow, somewhere in the middle of the first decade of the 2000s, it just exploded. And now everyone wants to sell their manga. And if you go to a comic book shop here in Brazil now, half of it is dedicated to manga, always. Mm-hmm. Everything, everywhere you can find it. So it's much more cool now to like manga and that kind of stuff. And I feel really old when I have to talk about that, because in my days, things are not as easy, but yeah, that's cool.
It wasn't even that long ago either. And now I'm like, it feels like ancient times.
It changed so much. Jesus.
Like it's only been a couple of decades, which hurts to say, but still.
Yeah, it's been like 2010 was like yesterday. Like, what am I doing in my life?
So when it comes to like being into anime and the like, do you find that influenced your art style?
Oh, a lot. Like I first started, I think I learned how to draw a lot of stuff, like copying manga artists and such. I learned a lot about narrative from manga. Mm-hmm. And I think I got a lot of more Western influence afterwards. So that might not be as evident, but yeah, I'm to this day, I'm still very into manga. Like, mm-hmm. I think that the way they restructure their pages, the layouts, everything, I think it's so unique. It works really, really well. There's also good storyboards sometimes, right? I mean, some artists are a bit of psychopaths, I think. It's because they like to draw every single action on frame. And like, oh, that's pretty cool. It looks amazing, but why do you do this to yourself? But it's really good. I love it.
When it comes to producing, like, and working on your own stuff, do you also enjoy writing your own narratives, or are you more in it for the drawing of it?
I do, but it takes forever because I found out that I'm a really slow writer, and I am working on a separate graphic novel that's written by me. That hopefully, if things work well and the conventions start happening again, I might release it later next year. Here in Brazil, I have to work with it side by side with other graphic novels that I'm working on. It takes a long time because, for example, if I am to write a 100-page long graphic novel, it take me a few months, and then I have to stop everything, and I have to draw that, and I have to stop everything. You have to edit that and release it. So the process that should be much shorter somehow gets spread out to 2, maybe 3 years. Some people can do it really quickly. I don't know how. I don't know if you know the work of Magenta King. He's also Brazilian. He's currently releasing Jenny Zero by Dark Horse Comics. He's a great guy, great friend. He was my teacher a while back, and somehow he managed to produce a 100-page long comic book in full color in like 20 days. And I don't know how he does it. I don't know what he drinks. I have no idea.
He entered the zone, you know.
Too much. Like how do you do this, guy? Come on. But he's capable of doing it. Like, all right, go for it.
So when it comes to releasing Brazilian comics, like what is the process of potentially, like, say, getting it onto Comixology or getting it translated into English? And is that ultimately an end goal that people strive for?
Depends if you have a publisher or not. If you do have a publisher, the publisher will take care of most of these things for you. So you'll talk with a different publisher abroad to see if they can release your work or not. Most people don't have publishers. So usually you either finance the book by yourself, or you do it via crowdfunding, or sometimes there are some government programs for creation comic books. They can try to apply and see if you can get the financial support to do it. But it's very limited, so not everyone does it every year. Either way, if you're fully independent and you want to publish your comic book abroad, you have to do it all by yourself. You have to translate it or find someone to translate it for you if you can speak the language, or if you don't feel very comfortable doing it. And you have to talk to the publisher, actually, talk to them and see if they're interested. I think it's very similar to the process of actually publishing your own comic book. For example, with Bittersweet Vows, we had to approach the publishing company and see if they're interested. You say yes, all that stuff. It's a very similar process. I think the real highs is Brazilian comic book author is releasing Necromorphos. He went through the same process. He first released Necromorphos here in Brazil as single issues and conventions. It was fun because every 6 months there was a convention. Every 6 months he would release an issue. so he released a new issue for the convention. Yeah. And now he's publishing a P.O Comics. It's pretty cool. So that's a way of doing it. But if you have a publisher, that stuff gets much easier.
So when it came to working with Alex, what was the process like? Like, how was it sending the images back and forth and getting the feedback and all of that?
It was everything via email. Actually, this story, Bittersweet Vows, is a story he wrote a while ago. He wrote it on a different format. It was going to be longer. I think it was 10 or 12 issues long. But then he started reworking the script. He decided to do it only as a 5-issue long miniseries. He was working with a different artist. I don't remember the name of that right now. Sorry. Somehow it didn't work out. But then he approached me, and by the time he came to talk to me, he already had some rough sketches of the characters, and he already sent me all the 5 scripts. Like the moment I said yes, the next day I have
they're all rough
there. Rough character designs, the full script for 5 issues, and a bunch of reference stuff. I'm like, all right, I guess we're doing it. So it was very, very straightforward, and it was very, very fun, very, very, very cool. It still is. We're working on a different graphic novel now. We're almost ending it. I think there's like 5 pages left for me to do.
Nice. Did you end up tweaking those character designs? Because you said you enjoy working so much with designing the character models and stuff.
A little bit. If you read the story, you know that they changed the outfit in the middle of the second and third issue. That was my thing.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah. They changed dramatically at some point because it made sense for the story for them to not use the same clothes all the time. But as things went on throughout the story, I think I tweaked a little bit the character design, but not too much to make it more of my own thing. But I couldn't change them too much because it had to be recognizable from the first to the last issue. But it was fun. It was a fun experience. It was interesting. It was pretty fun to draw the US in the 1930s. So like, I mean, the architecture is not so different from what it was here, but the customs, the way people act is so very different. So it was fun. It was a nightmare to find some good reference pictures from the time because, I mean, photography was not the resolution was not very good back then. So that was a bit tough, but no, it was fun. It was pretty cool.
So there was one, like, how did you find drawing the action sequences? Because I'm not going to lie, there was one if I can find the page, where I found it kind of difficult to follow. It's the one where they're doing the bait and switch, and it turns out that he's behind him, and you know, all of that with the gangster kind of exchange. Like, so how
with the mannequins, you said?
Yes. So like, how was it when you were getting like instructions? 'Cause I've always wondered, like, when you get like the whole pages of like action scene, like how much detail were you given in this case of like how it was meant to be presented and the like?
Alex writes a full script describing every panel. It's not so descriptive as some authors, thank God. But have you ever seen an Alan Moore script? It's amazing. Like, oh my gosh, like why? But anyway, he's a genius. But Jesus Christ, he sent me a full script detailing the action. That scene specific was a bit complicated because of a really crowded scene. There was a bunch of mannequins in a very small room, and you had to consider the geography of everything. So it was meant to be confusing. I'm not sure if it was meant to be as confusing as it got, but it was meant to be confusing. But usually he's not so descriptive with the action scenes. Usually just let loose and have fun with it, which I'm very thankful for. But I think it's important for the writer to have a good grasp of when to be very specific so the artist can understand what he's meant to do, to avoid having to redo stuff later, and being over descriptive and just sometimes not making it work very well. It's not the case. I think it's really good. Have
you ever had that experience where you've worked with someone very pedantic and just had to put in a lot of details?
Oh, thank God, no. But I had the opposite. I had the opposite experience where the script was so small. I mean, for example, this graphic novel here, Cabana.
Yeah.
It's a 70-page long graphic novel, and I think the script was like 30-page long. So it was very, very vague description of stuff. It was really, really fun actually to play with that sort of stuff, to play with that sort of thing. Like as you said, like you asked me before if I were willing to write my own comics on my own characters. That's sort of a way to do it with someone else's story. It's I think it's kind of like the Marvel way in a sense.
Kind of like filling it in.
Yeah, we just kind of have to fill it in. But both with that and with Bittersweet Vows, I think I have a comic book. Up until the day it was sent to print, we were still tweaking some small stuff here and there about dialogue and such to make sure it worked as well as possible. But as I usually said, a comic book's never really ready until it's published. So up until the day before it goes to print, you're still messing with it.
Yeah. I think every artist has experienced this, that whenever you look back at your work, there's always something that you would potentially have done differently or changed a little bit. Not necessarily even like if it would be better or not, just like I would have done that differently. So like, do you have anything like that with Bittersweet Vows when you look at it now? Is like anything you would have changed?
Well, that's why I don't like to reread stuff after a while. As I was doing it actually, before I was even finished, but by the time I reached the end of the 4th issue, I look back at the first one, I'm like, man, this inking's terrible. I I'm not gonna redo it because it's gonna be a lot of work. But Jesus Christ, it's awful. Now it's been it's been a while. So I look back at it. I'm like, yeah, okay, it's not as bad as I thought it was. But like, yeah, I could have done this here a little bit different. I think it's really really complicated. It happened once. A friend of mine asked me to draw a tattoo for him, to show the tattoo artist and do it on him. I never looked how it turned out because I really don't want to carry that weight. Like, oh, you're gonna carry that stuff in your back for the rest of your life. Please don't show it to me. I really don't want to see.
It's like Schrodinger's tattoo.
yeah, I know it's there. I can trust you on that. If you're happy, we are all happy.
That's what matters.
That's all that matters.
So do you have a favorite genre to draw, like a favorite style to work in?
I really like to draw urban settings, but at the same time, they take a lot of time to draw. So I think I like to draw a little bit of everything, because I don't know how other artists feel about that, but if I spend a long time drawing the same thing, by the time I'm done with it, I just want to do something different, whatever it is. Like after a while, I'm like, by the time I finish Bittersweet Vows, I'm like, all right, I really love vampires, but I don't want to have to draw another vampire for a couple months. So now I'm doing something completely different. So I think it's much less about which thing I like to do and much more about what's the thing I spend the most time doing for the past while.
So when it comes to, because every country has been different with the lifting of restrictions and everything that's been happening with the pandemic and the like, do you find that you're still spending most of your time working on comics, or are you now dividing it back with other work?
Sometimes I do some commission work, but I've been a full-time comic book artist since the pandemic started. It's working great. I mean, I don't know how the pandemic situation is in Canada. Here in Brazil, it's weird. It was really, really bad at the beginning of the year. We got to a point where we had like almost 5,000 people dying a day because of COVID. But now it's much better. The vaccination is working wonders for the situation. Things are starting to reopen, but not as much as before. There's still not conventions, for example. We can't have that yet. I think Comic-Con experience, they confirmed that this year they're only going to do a digital event, and next year they'll come back with a physical event. With a physical event. Right now, since I'm working from home and really most things are closed, and I don't really go anywhere most of the time. I go to the gym, I go back home, and that's mostly the amount of traveling you do on a daily. How's it going on Canada? I thought you were American until we started talking, and you said you were on Ontario, Canada. I was like, what, really? Okay.
No, a lot of people do, but then some people are like, no, because of how you say about. And I'm like, I think I say about like everybody else, but I don't know.
Yeah, I noticed that, but it's very slight difference. It's very easy to overlook. I'm like, okay.
No, it's funny because like whenever I mention that I'm from Canada, people are like, Canada? And I'm like, yes, Canada, where we also have more than snow. Do you find that like people have all kinds of assumptions or stereotypes, like when they hear that like a work is from Brazil or that you're from Brazil?
Maybe in the past, but not so much. I mean, nowadays we have some really big names that come from Brazil, like Ivan Reis, Joe Prado, and Marcelo Campos. I think he used to sign with Mark Campos back in the day, like Eudaro. So I don't know what people think about Brazil, but I do know we have a lot of big names abroad. So if it works for them.
So I guess I have to ask the obligatory, what do you think of Yara Flor? I saw that you drew her on your Instagram.
Oh, that's a very hot topic here in Brazil as well.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, because the indigenous population, they have a very strong opinion about Yara Flor. The rest of the country also has a very strong opinion about not only about Yara Flor, but about the folklore and all the creatures surrounding her, the culture. I feel it's a bit different than it was in the US, but here in Brazil, it's almost like we kind of stole their folklore and took it as our own. So we don't say, oh, it's native, it's indigenous folklore. Yeah. No, it's Brazilian folklore. So there's a big discussion going on about whether or not because those things there are, for example, those things that are mentioned on Yara Flor's character on record. I do like the character. Those things that are mentioned, for example, those creatures, it doesn't come from just one source. Sometimes there are many different tribes, so there are many different cultures all spread out, and we just mash them all up together and say, hey, that's a folklore. so those people are really upset. Not so I don't think they get as upset about the character, but they get upset about the whole situation that our culture stands in. And I kind of understand that. But at the same time, this process has been going for so long that it kind of becomes or folklore as well. It's that thing like you fake it until you make it. Like, so we are very used to all the symbolism that is being used in the character as well. I think the general consensus is if it's done respectfully, we're fine with it. I haven't read much of Yara Flor. I think I read the first issue. There was a 2-issue miniseries of Future State that came out earlier this year, right? I read the first one, and I saw some other stuff. I haven't read anything else besides that. Judging by the first issue, it makes sense that they're gonna mash some things from our culture with Greek culture because she has to exist in the same universe as Diana,
Wonder Woman.
Right? So it makes sense. You have to make that bridge. But overall, I think the character is pretty cool. It's all right, but it really depends how she's handled from now on. I think they canceled the idea for a TV show, right? There was going to be a TV show about her, wasn't it?
They like instantly announced a TV show, like simultaneously.
Yeah, they were really excited with the character.
And then they were like, actually, no.
All right.
That's why, like, whenever there are announcements, like on my channel, I always say, like, don't trust it till you're watching it because people say lots of things.
Eventually, maybe 10 years from now, I don't know.
I was kind of sad because I have been reading it and I think it's really interesting and I think that it's trying. I think is the best way and like what you can expect for most representations of mythology. I'm like, it's trying. And it's also a fictionalized version, which is how I look at it. And I find that with fictionalized versions of things, liberties are taken for like entertainment purposes, for universe purposes, for editorial purposes, for so many different reasons that maybe I'm just a cynic. I just don't expect anything to be entirely accurate.
I don't know. Is Joel Jones still writing it?
I believe so. I believe so.
She's an amazing artist. God, she draws so well.
Yeah.
I love the character design. I just gotta say that it's beautiful.
I think you need to talk to people from Brazil because like if you research it, at least if you research it here, like in Canada, it is very like difficult to discern like what comes from where. And they kind of just do this thing where they just call it like Tupi-Guarani mythology and then just kind of like lump everything all together without kind of breaking down the different things.
I don't know. Whenever people ask about Yara Flor's situation with Brazilian representation, I always think back. I don't know how was it back in the 40s when they created Diana as Wonder Woman. How did the Greeks feel about that? like, because it's a big caricature. Like lots of stuff about ancient Greece and things that they implemented on the characters' mythology. I'd be really curious to know from a Greek person what they think about it, because I think it really depends of the writer and artist. Sometimes it's weird with these characters, like these DC characters and Marvel characters, because from one writer's run to another, everything changes, and not always for the better. Hopefully for the better, but not always.
Is there any Marvel or DC character that you've always wanted to work on?
Oh, lots of them. I think everybody wants to draw Batman at some point, right? It's every kid's dream, and it's super easy to draw. I mean, it's only half a face. It's super cool. I always love Spider-Man. Really, Spider-Man and Daredevil. I think they're my favorite Marvel characters if we were to choose. And for DC, I think Superman is super hard to draw, even though his design is very simple. It's just a guy in a random suit, but it's really hard to make it work because since it's so simple, it might look silly if you do it wrong. The image of Superman is very specific, so it's hard to nail it. I would draw good stories. So if given the opportunity work just as hard on any one of them.
No, I was just thinking, like, it's really interesting what you said about Superman, but I think it's so true because I remember when they did that thing and they changed it and he had like a buzz cut and like a different t-shirt and everybody was like, who is this?
Yeah, it's very iconic, but God, the moment they took out the trunks,
Yes.
on New 52, people were going nuts. Like, guys, come on.
I keep it inside, but I do want the trunks back.
Yeah, I feel really bad for the writers actually.
Why so?
These characters have been around for like 80 years sometimes, and you want to do something different, something fresh, and people want to see something different, but not too different.
Yeah.
So it's really tricky. I think it must be really hard to come up with solutions, both graphic solutions, character design changes, because God knows how many different character designs Batman has had for the past, I don't know, 10 years. For the past 80, never mind. And also for the writers to come up with new ideas that might be acceptable for the fandom, but not too radical, not too different to scare people. I remember when, I think it was like 12, 15 years ago when Damian Wayne was introduced. People hated him at first. Now everybody loves him. It's one of those things where just give it time. People will get used to it, I guess.
No, I think he'd get some pushback on people loving Damian.
Right here, I remember people talking about it. They're like, who is this kid? Like, why? Why another Robin? There are like half a dozen Robins already. Why another one? And now people love him to death. Like, the Super Sons miniseries with Jorge Jimenez and Jonathan Kent, that was a big hit.
Yeah.
Everywhere. It was pretty good. Also, Jorge Jimenez is an amazing artist. That also helps.
So when it comes to thinking up ideas for comics, do you find that you have a lot of them at the same time, or do you find that you hone in on one idea and kind of focus on that?
When creating a story for comics?
Yeah.
Or
just even in general, because like I don't know, I find like I eat, sleep, breathe comics. So like, how do you find it?
You eat, sleep, breathe, and work with comics. Yeah. So you know it is. But yeah, I mean, sometimes if I'm writing it, sometimes there's a specific theme that I'm going to tackle. And since I'm usually writing for myself, it's entirely independent, so I don't have to worry that much about deadlines at first. When I'm first creating story, I have to worry about deadlines at some point, otherwise it's never going to get it done. But at first, I like just, watching stuff and reading stuff and see if there is a specific theme that I want to tackle. When it comes to drawing someone else's comic book, someone else's story, for example, Bittersweet Vows, it was really interesting. It's a very different assignment where you have to take that story, that baby, from someone else's hands. And you're like, oh, I'm gonna take care of that baby, okay? Then I go around and I come back. I don't know, the baby has a piercing exactly, but it's okay. The baby's fine. Don't worry too much about the baby. It's still alive. That's a little bit of me here as well, but it's okay. It's very personal. Like you're messing with someone else's story. You're taking their ideas and translating it. I never wrote a comic book for someone else to draw. That would be a weird experience. It must be really different. It must be a really different experience for people writing only for other people to draw, because
there's a trust, I think, that you kind of have to trust that it's gonna come back how you expect, but also trust that you need to also rein yourself in, because you know that there's no way that it's entirely going to look how you imagined. So
if I draw a comic book that I wrote and I mess up, that's on me. I can't blame anyone else. If I mess up, I can redo it and correct it. But if I'm gonna send the script for someone else to draw it, I don't know. I might be a little bit of a control freak, but I don't know how you feel about that. Jesus, how? So thank you for all the writers. Thank you all for the trust, because I don't know how we would do it if I were you. Really.
So I want to say thank you for taking some time to chat with me, and also like let people know how they can find you, how they can potentially find your work, and all that good stuff.
Sure. I'm on Instagram at Gustavo.Novaes. Novaes is, I think it's written on the video, but it's Novaes. I'm also on Behance, Facebook. I tried to make a Twitter account, but I just don't keep up with it. So if you want to follow, it's okay. It's the same thing as Gustavo Novaes, but you might not find lots of stuff there. Thank you very much, Sasha, for the opportunity.
No, thank you very much for chatting with me. It was really interesting. I appreciate it. I'm sure that the viewers will as well. Hi, you made it. Welcome to the end. I will, of course, have all of Gustavo's links down below. I will also have links to where you can get Bittersweet Vows. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I did. Thanks so much again to Gustavo for chatting with us. And let me know, have you ever tried your hand at drawing your own comic? Tell me things down below. While you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking time today to spend discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.